Okay, if you have your Bibles, you can turn with me to Genesis chapter 39. Genesis chapter 39 is an interesting passage in our Bibles. We have been looking at the story of Joseph, but then all of a sudden in the middle of that, a story of Judah happens to intercalate with a story. I don't know if that's how you pronounce the word, but it does got your attention at least, right? Lucas is saying, no, you said it wrong. Okay, sorry, buddy. So anyways, it's just like fascinates us why the story of Joseph gets interrupted with the story of Judah. And it's not a really great story about Judah. And then Joseph is going to get accused of doing things. He doesn't actually do things wrong. He gets accused of doing things, and the accusation is completely false and baseless. And it's like, whoa, wait a second. And then for the story to play out as it does, and have Judah become somewhat of a hero and become the one from whom the kings of Israel will follow and the one from whom the Messiah of the Word would follow. You would think that if a person behaves like this, that they would earn the right to have the Messiah come from them. But it goes back to the testimony time when we're talking about you are the righteousness of God in him. You know, at some level, you know, a guy like Judah can actually have his sins forgiven. A guy like Joseph can have his sins forgiven. Now, it is true, tongue-in-cheek, last time we looked at Joseph's life, you know, we did say that, okay, that little tale he told about his brothers is always used in a very bad sense. It's based on deception. He's not telling the truth. However, in Joseph's case, he was telling the truth, even though in the perception of the brothers, he's saying something false about us. He's giving a bad report to our father about our bad behavior. Well, he was giving the faithful report about your bad behavior because your behavior was really bad. And so we have this guy over here now in Egypt, and the Lord was with him. So, first application, do people notice that the Lord is with you? Do you notice that the Lord is with you? Do you believe that the Lord is with you when you go through hard times? Okay, bear with me for just a second, right? Because we're going to have some success in this chapter, okay? The same kind of word is used when Abraham's servant is going to find a wife for Isaac, and he had good success. And it looks like Joseph is having the same kind of good success down here in Egypt, and then all of a sudden the rug gets pulled out from underneath him. Do you believe that the Lord is with you when the rug gets pulled out from underneath you? That's a huge one, people. We don't always do well at that one. You go to the doctors, you hear a bad report. Cancer. Had a bad fall. Just all of the stuff we hear, you know? And it's like, do you believe that God is with you? Well, I can tell you, based on the scriptures, that God is with you. How does the Gospel of Matthew end? The very last verse, and lo, I am with you. And it's like, well, that was to their generation. To the end of the age? Wait a second, someone down here is clarifying. To the end of the age. They weren't going to live eternally, so someone else was going to have to do it. Jesus Christ would be with us to the end of the age. And that's the promise. We have some really cool promises that God makes with Abraham, that God makes with Isaac, that God makes with Jacob, that God makes with Joseph, that God makes with Moses, and that God makes with you and me. I'm with you. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. Joseph has to learn this. And you say, well, he's a smart guy. He already knows this. Well, yeah, I agree with you, but unfortunately, he's going to have to live it, or maybe a better way to say it is he's going to have to experience it once again. They threw him in a well after all. People who loved him and called him brother. From the same father, family members doing this to him. Does it bother you when your family treats you bad? Sometimes. Well, you guys come from religious families, and so they don't treat you badly. But Jesus came from a religious community, and they treated him real badly. Okay? So it does happen that religious people do bad things to good people. All right? But it doesn't mean that God isn't with you. And so that becomes the lesson for us here. The title, Joseph in Prison. Well, we started with him, Joseph in Egypt. Where's the promised land? It's back there. It's not Egypt. But part of the prophecy to Abraham was that they would live there for 400 years. And so unfortunately, this is the beginning of the fulfillment of that prophecy. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the passage. And I don't know if I'm going to end up commenting or not. I don't know how to handle it best. And I always struggle with these things because, you guys knew that already, though. So you came prepared. Box of tissues in one hand. No, I'm just teasing. Weeping for the preaching. Yes. No. And so this ends up being one of the darkest episodes in Joseph's life. Okay. It's not a good time because he's a good person. He doesn't do these kinds of things, right? Did you ever have someone falsely accuse you of anything? I remember when I stayed with Frank Dunn. I don't believe he's alive anymore. So it's an ancient history. Okay? This guy accused me of stealing money from him. Now, I was a thief before I was saved, yes, granted. But then I became really pretty faithful about money. And my mom would give me milk money. And I would save the 6 cents every day and go drink water. I'd been doing this for quite some time. Almost had enough accumulated to buy a model submarine. It's like, great, what do you want a model submarine for? I have no idea, but I could put it together and then later on I would take it apart and put it in the trash. But, I was just saving this money, buying this thing. So he sent me to Burn Dairy and I was supposed to buy something, and he said, do you have any money? But he was talking to me and asking me if I had any money left over from the last time I went to the grocery to get the groceries. I didn't have any of his money. I had money for a model, but I didn't have his money that my mom gave to him so that he could buy groceries for us so that we could eat. He sent me to the store. They overcharged me, and I paid for it of the money that I'd been saving at 6 cents a day for all those days. And these things, it took quite a sacrifice, I'd been doing it for quite some time. I got home and told him, you didn't give me enough money and I paid for it. It's like, wait a second, you lied. I'm going to tell everybody who's religious or spiritual in the United States of America, I'm exaggerating to make his point, but I'm going to call Jack Wurtson, the leader of the Word of Life camps. I'm going to call Jack. This would be similar to, here in Kansas City, you had the Youth for Christ, who was the director of Youth for Christ at the time. So you get falsely accused and say, I'm going to call the director of Youth for Christ, and I'm going to tell him what a bad person you are. And he was going on, just a real big rant. But I hadn't told him a fib. I hadn't told him an untruth. I didn't have any of his money, and I didn't have any money left over, and it just was the way that it was. And so he was telling me things that just wasn't true. And so, it does happen. And you guys have never had this happen to you? Just live for a little while, and then it will happen, and someone who is totally convinced you did something wrong. Happens to me every day when I'm driving to work, right? They think I'm in the wrong lane going too slow, whatever it is. And it's just like, and I know what the speed limit is. I'm going 10, 15 miles. I'm not going to finish that statement because I don't want someone showing up at the door with, but you know the zone right there. You go from 50 to 35. If you don't hit that sign going 35, you are speeding. Everybody does it. I don't want to get hit from behind, so I pause a little bit before I hit the brakes, right? And besides, I get closer to work that way. You know how the story is. But there are people who think I'm doing it wrong when I hit the brakes, right? You know how it works. Falsely accusing your good behavior, right? But you know what I mean? It does happen that good people, and that was a story about being bad, but good people do good things and bad people think they're bad. And it happens frequently. So that's part of what the fabric of this story. It's a dark time for Joseph. He was being successful. It looked like things were turning out. Potiphar wasn't the right guy. Potiphar was a great guy, but he wasn't the right guy, not according to God's sovereign plan. So something did have to happen, and Joseph doesn't know about that. Despite not knowing God's plan, the Lord is still with him. And he has to live by faith, going through the dark times, going into the prison. Okay, so it becomes important that we understand the things that is happening. He's experiencing God's blessing. Potiphar places him in charge of everything. And then you'll see that he's placed in charge of the royal prison where the royal prisoners are kept. These are the special prisoners that only the Pharaoh can let go and only the Pharaoh can pardon. And so there becomes this in his situation where, the only person who could save me on planet Earth is Pharaoh. And sure enough, Pharaoh does save him. But he has to go through all of this experience. So why don't we go ahead and get started with all of this, take a look at our story. Okay, so reading from the ESV. Now Joseph had been brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. Isn't that cool? So, it's like we have all of this stuff where, being successful and I wanted to see if there's more to that application. No, I'll make it in a minute. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his Egyptian master. Okay, so a couple of these things. In Genesis chapter 26, verse 3, sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and will bless you and your offspring, right? Genesis 26, 24, fear not, for I am with you. And I will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake. Genesis 26, 28, they said, we see plainly that the Lord has been with you. Okay? So we said, let there be a sworn pact between us, between you and us, and let us make a covenant with you. Genesis 28:15, behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. Genesis 28:20, then Jacob made a vow saying, if God will be with me, and will keep me in this way that I go, then I'll give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, then I will give him a tenth of everything. In Genesis 31, verse 3, the Lord said to Jacob, return to your land, to your fathers, to your kindred, and I will be with you. So, the Lord is with Joseph. Now, what is the Lord? I want to back up and just ask a better question. Okay. So Genesis 39:21, it is going to end with this. It starts with the Lord was with them. It's going to end with the Lord is with them. And so that really makes it nice that encapsulated in the Lord is with him, we have this dark chapter. It's really nice to know that God is with him. It's really nice to know that God is with you when you go through a dark and difficult time. So are you reassured that the Lord is with you? Are you recognized as a person that God is with? That's what Potiphar is recognizing about Joseph. And do you have the perspective that despite all the setbacks, that the Lord is with you? Because sometimes it gets dark and scary, and then all of a sudden we start to doubt. We think that maybe God isn't with us. And does your success seem to unravel after a while? Okay? The success that Abraham's servant had on the mission to find a wife, and you're doing well in Egypt and Potiphar, and things are going well, and the Lord's blessing you, and the Lord's blessing Potiphar, and then all of a sudden this story. It happens. And it happens to good people. So his master saw that the Lord was with him in verse 3, and that the Lord had caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight and attended him like Joshua attended Moses and like Elisha attended Elijah, attended him. Okay? And he made him overseer of his house and put him in charge of all that he had. From that time, he made him overseer in his house and over all that he had. The Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Jacob's sake. Why? Because in Genesis chapter 12, verse 3, he said, in you, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. And it just happens to be a descendant of Abraham. He's in a foreign place. They put him in charge, and sure enough, he blesses the nations. And it's kind of cool that this happens. So, he's going to rescue nations, when he actually starts doling out the food. He's going to be there. He's going to help them. So, the Lord's blessing was on all that he had in the house and in the field. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. And because of him, he had no concern about anything but the food that he ate. That's a pretty sweet life. It's like, oh my goodness. It's always nice to have a faithful servant like this. Now, Joseph was handsome. Oh my goodness. He's got one flaw. You say handsome? Yeah, that's his flaw. Had he been ugly like me, he'd never been noticed. But he's not. He's handsome. He's handsome like the only other person described in the Bible. You know who that was? His mother. I know it's handsome, you think of a guy, but no, Hebrew gets to do this. English probably doesn't, but his mom is described with the same term. So yeah, he gets his family resemblance from his mom. And so they are the only two people in the Bible who are described like this. Handsome in form and appearance, and he's got the double thing, both his form and his appearance. His mom was the same way. No wonder Jacob liked her. So, and after a time, his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, lie with me. It's kind of interesting that she's telling him to let his guard down just a little bit. Let your guard down just a little bit and let's see what happens. He's a faithful man, however, he doesn't do that. But he refused and said, he gives 3 reasons. 3 reasons why it's not a good idea. First of all, the trust. The fact that someone trusts me with so much stuff, I can't violate the trust. The second thing, the master. Potiphar doesn't deserve this. And the third thing is God. God doesn't deserve it either. So this is what he says back. But he refused and said, oh, wait a second now. Who's the servant and who's the master? He's the slave in this house. She's going to call attention to the fact that your slave just disobeyed a direct order. Well, her order. And he doesn't do it because it's a violation, a sin against God, and he's going to take the consequences for it. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, because of me, my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can you do this great wickedness and sin against God? The trust, the master, and God. Those would be the 3 violations that he calls attention to. And as she spoke to Joseph day after day, it wasn't just a one-time thing. This is premeditated. It's thought through, and she keeps after it. She's insistent. He would not listen to her, to lie beside her, or to be with her. But one day, when he came into the house to do his work, none of the men of the house was there in the house. So she caught him by his garment. Now, this is a violent thing, right? Okay, so the last time we talked about somebody doing something with his garment, I said that they tore it. And someone said, no, they didn't. And the other person is probably right, but the word they used to describe taking the garment off Joseph back there was flay. You shall flay the sacrifice. And Joseph was flayed by his brothers. And now she caught him by his garment saying, lie with me. And it's a violent, aggressive thing. So for her to get his garment off It's like she has this thing planned. Who knows? Maybe she was one of those big burly people who could, carry their husband a long ways and do the races that they do up there in the northern hemisphere. But he left his garment in her hand, and he fled and got out of the house. And as soon as she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled out of the house, she called to the men of the household and said to them, "See," and you have to listen to this, okay? The narrator has just told us the story, and she's going to repeat it twice. And you know what liars always do? Well, you know what they don't do? They don't repeat the story correctly both times, right? So she's not going to say it the same way both times, okay? So this is the first time to the servants. "See, he has brought to us a Hebrew to laugh at us." So who's she laying to blame for this travesty? Her husband, okay? He brought this Hebrew among us. He's a Hebrew after all. Unlike you, He doesn't like you. He doesn't treat you well. He didn't treat me well, apparently. So we're all liking all of this. And he came to lie with me, and I cried out with a loud voice. And as soon as he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. So it's not exactly what happened, right? Then she laid up his garment, and this is like the second time his garments have been used against him. So it's not he's experienced this before. She laid up his garment by her, like petting a kitty or something like that. Who knows? I have no idea. Until his master came home, and she told him the same story. Same story, different word order, okay? "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us," and once again, you're the fault. The Hebrew servant came in. Servant, wait a second now. He was she didn't say servant the first time. She said the Hebrew among you servants. And now the Hebrew servant whom you brought among us came into me to laugh at me. But as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. And that's not how it was. He fled. She cried out to the people to come and be witnesses of all of this stuff. And as soon as his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, of course he was enraged, inflamed, or whatever. "This is the way your servant treated me." His anger was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined, and he was there in the prison. Now, do you think if he were the captain of the guard, that he couldn't have just executed this guy? I have a feeling that he could have, and maybe he didn't. But why wouldn't he have done it? Well, maybe he didn't completely believe his wife. Maybe. It's speculation at some point. But this is what happens. And then you have verse 21. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. That's your really cool word in the Old Testament. It showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. And the keeper of the prison put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners. And once again, this person's in charge. Person's in charge, going to be in charge of Egypt, going to dole out the food, and his family's going to bow down because Joseph is in charge. Whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. And the keeper of the prison paid no attention to anything that was in Joseph's charge because the Lord was with him. Not a cool thought? Cool thought. The Lord is with him. And whatever he did, the Lord made to succeed. So we've got some applications, right?